The parade was supposed to be the safest place in town. That was the whole point of Founders Day in Larkhaven. Closed streets, barricades, volunteers in bright vests, a marching band that practiced for weeks, and floats that looked like rolling craft projects. People brought lawn chairs at dawn. Kids wore paper crowns and carried little flags. The smell of kettle corn and grilled onions drifted down Main Street like a promise that nothing bad could happen as long as the music kept playing. Marshal Grant Hensley told himself the same thing every year. Grant wasn't a marshal in the cowboy movie sense, but in the practical sense. The parade marshal, the guy in charge of keeping thousands of small-town folks safe during the biggest event of the summer. He was 41, broad-shouldered, sunburned around the neck despite his wide-brim hat, and he carried a radio like it was an extra organ. He'd been a firefighter before a knee injury pushed him into a different kind of public safety, and he treated the parade route the way he treated a burning building. Scan, anticipate, control the chaos before it found you. By noon, the sidewalks were packed. Cheerleaders waved from the curb. The marching band's drums thumped in Grant's chest as they turned onto Main. He walked the route at a steady pace, eyes moving constantly. Crowd gaps, overheated grandparents, toddlers too close to the street. Everything was fine, until the Bobcat showed up. It happened near the intersection by Riley's Hardware, right where the float slowed to make the turn. Grant heard the first scream and assumed it was excited, some kid spotting the candy toss early. Then he saw the crowd recoil. A shape moved out of the alley between the hardware store and the bakery, a compact, tawny animal with tufted ears and a short tail. It was too big to be a stray cat and too steady to be a dog. It paused on the curb, eyes bright and focused, then, before anyone could react, sprang. It landed on the side rail of the next float like it had practiced. The float belonged to Larkhaven's Historical Society. It was built like an old-timey wagon with faux wooden panels, straw bales, and a big painted sign that read, "Our roots run deep." A volunteer dressed as a pioneer waved from the top, and two teenagers sat on a bench pretending to churn butter for laughs. The Bobcat vaulted onto the platform, claws gripping the painted plywood, and froze in the center as if it had claimed the stage. For half a second, there was total silence. One of those impossible pauses where a whole street seems to stop breathing. Then chaos hit. People shrieked. Phones flew up. A vendor dropped a tray of lemonade cups. The band faltered, drums stuttering as the musicians turned their heads in disbelief. "Animal on a float," Grant snapped into his radio. "Hold the line. Stop the next unit." Volunteers rushed forward instinctively, waving their arms, yelling, "Get it off! Get it off!" Grant's blood went cold. Waving and yelling was how you turned a wild animal into a panicked projectile in the middle of a crowd. "Back!" he barked, voice cutting through the noise like a siren. "Nobody rush it. Give it space." The float driver, a middle-aged man with a straw hat, hit the brake, and the wagon shuddered to a stop. The horses weren't real. It was pulled by a tractor hidden behind decorative panels. Even so, the sudden stop made the platform creak. The pioneer volunteer on top of the float, Maddie Shaw, Grant recognized her, stood frozen, eyes wide, hands lifted in helpless uncertainty. The Bobcat looked at her, ears forward, then turned away as if she was irrelevant. Grant moved closer, careful, scanning for the fastest way to get the animal off without it leaping into the crowd. He signaled to two volunteers to widen the buffer around the float, pushing people back behind the barricades. The Bobcat paced once, tight, controlled, then stopped at the center seam of the platform. And then it did something that made Grant forget the crowd for a heartbeat. It crouched and pressed its head down, listening. Then it scratched at the boards, 3 quick rakes of claws, followed by a sharp, urgent yowl that cut straight through the parade noise. Grant felt his stomach drop. That yowl wasn't a threat. It was alarm. The Bobcat moved to the edge of the float and looked down, not at the crowd, but beneath the platform, where the float's decorative skirting hung like a curtain around the undercarriage. It pawed at the skirting, tugging it aside. Something shifted underneath. A muffled sound rose up, small, broken, terrified, a child's cry. Grant's entire body went rigid. The sound was unmistakable, the thin, high cry of a kid trying not to cry too loud. He stepped closer, ignoring the Bobcat for a second. focusing on the float's underside. He dropped to one knee and lifted the decorative skirting. Under the platform, in the cramped shadow space between support beams and the tractor's frame, a small figure was wedged like a hidden package. A child, maybe 5 or 6. A little girl in a yellow dress with white daisies, face streaked with tears and dust, hair tangled around her cheeks. One arm was trapped behind a beam, and her knees were drawn up tight as if she'd been there long enough to fold into the smallest shape possible. Her eyes were huge and glassy with panic. Grant's heart slammed so hard it hurt. "Hey!" he said instantly, voice dropping into the calm he used for rescues. "Hey, sweetheart, I see you. You're okay. I'm right here." The girl shook her head violently, sobbing. I can't." "You're stuck," Grant said gently. "That's okay. We're going to get you out." Above him, the bobcat stood at the platform edge, staring down, ears forward, tail stump twitching with agitation. It yowled again, shorter this time, like it was scolding the humans for not looking sooner. Grant keyed his radio. "Emergency under float 3. Child trapped beneath the platform. I need EMS and fire tools now. Stop the parade. Stop all movement on this street." The dispatcher's voice came back sharp. "Copy. Units en route." Grant looked up at Maddie, still frozen on top of the float. "Maddie," he shouted, "don't move. Nobody shift weight. Keep everyone still." Maddie nodded, face pale. Grant turned back to the child. "What's your name?" The girl's lips trembled. "Lila. Lila, I'm Grant. Can you breathe okay?" Lila nodded shakily, sobbing in little hiccups. "It's scary." "I know," Grant said. "You're doing so good. Stay still for me, okay? We don't want the float to move." Lila tried to wipe her face with her free hand and smeared dirt across her cheek. I was looking for my mom," she whispered. "I went behind, and then it moved." Grant's mind flashed to the chaos behind floats, kids darting through gaps, adults distracted, skirting flapping. Lila could have crawled under to retrieve something, or slipped when the float started rolling. The space beneath was low and full of sharp edges. If the tractor had shifted wrong, if a tire had rolled, if a beam had pinched, Grant forced the thought away before it could drown him. "Okay," he said steady. "We're going to get you out before anything else happens." He examined the space. Lila was wedged between a cross beam and a decorative panel that had sagged inward, trapping her arm. Not crushed, but pinned enough that she couldn't wriggle free. The float's skirting and the parade noise had hidden her completely. She could have been under there for minutes already, maybe longer, crying where no one could hear over drums and cheering. Except someone had heard. Grant's gaze flicked to the bobcat again, and he felt a shiver of disbelief. How had it found her? Had it heard her sobbing from the alley? Had it seen her go under? Had it been drawn by something else and then discovered the sound? Whatever the reason, it had not only found her, it had escalated. It had climbed into the loudest, most visible place and refused to leave until someone looked under the platform. The bobcat was still there, tense, watching Grant's hands. Grant raised his palm slightly toward it, a slow, calming gesture. "Easy," he murmured, mostly reflex. "We're helping." The bobcat blinked once and didn't move. Firefighters arrived in less than 3 minutes, 2 of them jogging through the stopped parade line with a small tool bag and a battery-powered spreader. EMS followed with a stretcher and blankets. The sight of uniforms calmed the crowd in a strange way. People stepped back, murmuring, suddenly aware that this wasn't a funny wildlife moment. This was real. One firefighter, Quinn, knelt beside Grant. "What have we got?" "Child pinned under the platform," Grant said fast. "Arm caught behind that beam. We need to lift the panel without shifting the float." Quinn peered under, his expression tightening instantly. "Hey there, kiddo," he said gently. "We've got you." Lila sobbed harder when she saw him, relief and fear colliding. Quinn signaled to his partner. They slid a small inflatable lift bag under the sagging panel and positioned a wooden block as a brace. Grant kept his body between Lila and the tractor's moving parts, shielding her from the sight of metal and grease. "Lila," Grant said, voice calm like a steady rope. "You're going to feel the panel move a little, okay? But we're holding it. It won't hurt you." Lila nodded, eyes squeezed shut. Quinn inflated the bag slowly. The panel rose a fraction of an inch. Lila gasped. Good, Grant murmured. That's good. Another fraction. Another. Grant watched the trapped arm carefully, making sure it wasn't being twisted. When the gap widened enough, Quinn slid his gloved fingers in and gently guided Lila's arm free. Okay, Quinn said. On three, we're going to pull you out feet first. Ready? Lila's voice was tiny. Okay. 1, 2, 3. They eased her out carefully, supporting her shoulders and hips so she didn't scrape against bolts. Lila emerged into the evening light like someone pulled from a nightmare. Dusty, trembling, crying with full body shakes. Grant wrapped her in a blanket immediately. You're out, he told her softly. You're safe. Lila clutched his jacket with both hands like she was afraid the ground might swallow her again. The crowd erupted. Not cheering, not exactly, but a rush of voices, gasps, sobs, people covering their mouths. Somewhere a woman screamed a name. Lila! A frantic mother barreled through the volunteers, face white with terror. She dropped to her knees and grabbed Lila, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Oh my God! Oh my God! Lila clung to her, still shaking. Mom, I'm here. Grant stepped back to give them space, chest tight. He looked up at the float. Maddie was crying openly now, hands pressed to her mouth, staring down at the empty space where the bobcat still stood. Because the bobcat hadn't fled when the sirens arrived. It remained on the platform through the entire rescue, watching with a stillness that felt almost fierce. Now with Lila safe in her mother's arms, the bobcat's posture changed. Its shoulders lowered slightly. Its tail stopped snapping. It stood, walked to the edge of the float, and looked down at the street. Grant held his breath, afraid it would leap into the crowd. But the bobcat didn't jump toward the people. It jumped away from them, landing lightly on the far side near the hardware store, where the alley opened into a quieter strip of grass and shrubs. It paused once, looked back at the float in the cluster of uniforms and the mother holding her child. Then it slipped into the alley and disappeared, as if the parade had never been its problem to begin with. The street stayed frozen for several seconds after it vanished, like the whole town needed time to believe the wildcat was gone and the child was real and alive and in the right arms. Grant exhaled slowly, feeling his knees go a little weak now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. Quinn clapped his shoulder once. Good call stopping everything, the firefighter murmured. Another minute, and that float could have moved. Grant nodded, unable to speak around the thick lump in his throat. Later, after Lila was checked by EMS, minor scrapes, bruises, shaken but okay, and after the parade was canceled and the floats were guided back to the fairgrounds in silence, Grant walked alone along the now empty stretch of Main Street. Kettle corn cups rolled in the gutter. A small flag lay crushed near the curb. The air still smelled of exhaust and sugar and warm pavement. He stopped near the hardware store alley where the bobcat had appeared. Behind the dumpsters and stacked pallets, the ground was soft with dirt and weeds. Grant shone his flashlight, half hoping to see nothing because seeing anything would make it feel too real. But he did see something. Paw prints, small round impressions in the dust, purposeful, leading from the alley toward the parade route, and then back again. Grant stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet that had returned after the music stopped. He tried to make sense of it the way he made sense of everything else in public safety. Cause, effect, chain of events. A child had slipped under a float and become trapped beneath a moving platform in the loudest, most crowded moment of the year. Her cries had been swallowed by drums and cheering. No one had looked because no one imagined that kind of danger could exist in a celebration. No one, except a wild animal that had heard something wrong. Grant didn't know if the bobcat had been drawn by the noise and confused, or if it had been following the smell of food vendors and wandered into town. He didn't know why it had chosen that float, why it had jumped up instead of running away like wildlife usually did. But he knew what he'd seen. A bobcat that didn't act like it was fleeing a parade. A bobcat that acted like it was interrupting one. Like it had climbed onto the most visible stage in town to force someone in charge to look underneath. That night, long after the street was reopened and the barricades were stacked away, Grant sat in his office and wrote the incident report. He described the child's location, the rescue steps, the timing, the crowd control. He wrote about the float skirting creating a blind spot, about the need for under-platform checks before movement. Then he got to the part he didn't know how to phrase. Wild bobcat entered route and climbed onto float, he typed, fingers hesitating. Animal remained on platform, vocalized, and drew attention to trapped child beneath. He stared at the words until they blurred slightly, then finished the report and saved it anyway. Because sometimes the truth sounded like a story people would roll their eyes at. And yet the next morning, when Grant drove past the alley on his way to work, he saw a single tuft of tawny fur caught on a nail on the fence. Just a tiny thread of wildness left behind like a signature. He slowed, stared at it, and felt the same strange mix of gratitude and humility settle into him. The parade had been the safest place in town, until it wasn't. And on the day everyone was looking up at waving pioneers and bright banners, it took a bobcat on a float to make the marshal look down and hear the one small cry that mattered most.